Hi, I'm Mitch Gallagher from Sweetwater. Welcome to Mix Tips. This time out, we're addressing one of the most common questions when it comes to creating a mix, and that's how to get the electric bass and the kick drum to work well together. How to get the bass to sit right with the kick in your mix. It's an important question because the kick and the bass are the foundation of everything else that goes on in most styles of music. We want to make sure they're not fighting one another, that they're working together to give us a solid bass, B-A-S-E, to build off of. So to begin, the number one thing you need to do to get the bass to sit right in your mix is to make sure you can hear it properly. That means addressing the acoustics in your room so that it supports the bass accurately, so that what you're hearing coming out of your monitors is what's actually happening with your mix. You might need a subwoofer to do that. You might need to set up your monitors properly. You might need bass trapping in the room. Whatever you need to do, you want to make the bass in your room as accurate as possible. Now you might wonder if you can do this using headphones so you don't have to worry about the acoustics in your room. You certainly can, but you have to be careful with using headphones because many of them are set up to emphasize the bass so it sounds big in your ears when that's not really what's happening in the signal. So be careful with headphones, be careful with the sound in your room, and you'll get much better results when you're mixing your bass in your mix. Now, the other thing you can do to really help with this is to do a lot of referencing. And by that, I mean listening to mixes where you like the sound of the bass. Put on something where the bass sounds great to you. Hear what it sounds like in your room. Really focus in on it. Find a few other examples. Focus in on those as well. Then when you go to create your own mix, you'll be able to remember what that sounds like or to bounce back and forth with those other mixes. Compare what you're getting to what's in the mixes you like. Try to match it up and you should get good results. So referencing can be a very important tool when you're mixing your bass. The second aspect of getting bass to work well in your mix is making sure the arrangement is set up so that the bass has room to speak. If you have a ton of things going on in the low end, you have all kinds of synthesizers happening, you have down-tuned guitars, you have special effects, you've got big drums, you've got floor toms, and then you've got the bass that you're trying to squeeze in there. It's going to be very difficult. So make sure the arrangement of your song is set up to allow the bass to speak well, and that'll make mixing the bass very easy as well. So having said all that, when we get down to actually working with your bass in the mix, there are some tools and techniques we can use to make it easier and to give you better results. So let's dive in and take a look. I've got a mix here. We'll just listen to the beginning of it. It's a full band mix with guitars, there's organ, there's electric piano, there's electric bass, drum kit of course. So here's a little bit of that mix. So, big sounding mix, we've got a lot of bottom end there. The first thing we want to do is make room in our mix for the bass. And in this case, that means making sure that our guitars aren't taking up too much in that frequency range, that our keyboards aren't taking up too much in that frequency range as well. So let's take a look here. If we go down and we solo the organ, we've got the organ top and the organ bass. With a Hammond speaker or a Leslie speaker on a Hammond organ, there actually are two speakers in the enclosure. The top is a horn that rotates that has the mid and high frequencies, and then there's a rotor underneath that drives the low frequencies as well. And a lot of times I find when I'm mixing, you can actually drop that rotor completely out without really affecting the sound that you're hearing in the mix, because the organ is part of the overall texture. It's not being featured here. So let's listen to it and see what we get. I'm going to move over a little bit to where the song starts. There we go. So if we take out that lower rotor, it does change the tone here a little bit, and I want to make sure we're keeping that. So what we might do instead is use a high-pass filter. So let's go up here and insert a single band EQ, and we can set this up as a high-pass filter, and we can set the frequency for that. Let's pull that down somewhere to the 100 hertz or so range. Let's raise that frequency a little bit. So we can also change the slope on this filter. The slope is going to determine how gradually the filter starts to work. So in this case, we're dropping 12 dB an octave, which is actually fairly steep. If we turn that down to say 6 dB an octave, you can see the slope becomes more gentle and more of those low frequencies are going to come in, but it's going to sound more natural. We aren't going to just hard cut those off. But let's go ahead and turn that up a little bit. Let's turn it up to 18. So in that case, it's really opening that up on that bottom end. We're taking out some of those sub-frequencies that we really don't need in that organ, but we can still hear the rotor turning. So we've opened up some bottom end room there. Now if we go over to our guitars, let's find one that's playing here. Okay, there's not a ton of bottom end there, so I don't think we have to worry about that too much. I don't know what else is playing here. Let's look. Okay, if we go a little farther in, we've got some other guitars that come in. That's our acoustic guitar. Let's go ahead and put a high-pass filter on that. Again, we just want to clean up those low frequencies a bit. Not quite that high. Yeah, so we've just taken out some of the low resonance or the rumble out of that acoustic guitar track. In our Atmos guitar, not much happening there. Okay, let's see if some of our other guitars down here. Yeah, not a lot of bottom on those either. Let's listen to here. I think those are fine. Let's go down here to these wallpaper guitars. And I think we're okay on those too. None of these guitars have a ton of bottom end on them. If we had other guitars going on with a lot of bottom end, maybe they're down tuned, maybe we're playing low on the neck or a big heavy sound, in that case you might want to high pass filter those a bit again, just to open up some space for the bass. So let's go back over here. We've now got those guitars and things cleaned up. Let's just listen to our mix like this. I can already hear the bass clearer here on my monitors in my room just by opening up just that little bit. Not a huge difference, subtle one, but it's an important one. So I recommend going through your tracks, seeing where you can take out some bottom end where it's not essential with a sound. Now, I don't want you to change sounds so much that they're not the same sound anymore. What I want you to do is just remove the unessential or the unnecessary low end from sounds so that we have more room for the kick drum and for the bass guitar. Our second technique is to ensure that the kick drum and the bass guitar are complementing each other and not fighting one another. And this is typically going to happen in the frequency domain. If we have a ton of bottom end in our kick drum and we have a ton of bottom end in our electric bass, they're going to fight one another because they're both going to be trying to fit into that same frequency range. So what we want to do is sort of make them complementary, where say the kick drum has a lot of bottom end and the electric bass doesn't have much bottom, but it has a lot of mids and top. That way they'll kind of stack together and sit well in the mix. So let's take a listen here and see what we've got. What I'm going to do is hide all the other tracks. We'll actually mute all of them. Well, what we'll do is we'll solo the kick and we'll solo the bass, and I'm going to hide the rest of the tracks here so that we aren't looking at things we don't need. Let's go back to the beginning of the song where we've got a good strong start. Let's go ahead and insert an EQ here. Let's go with the 7-band EQ so we can see what we've got. Now what I want to do is just bring in some of the snap on the top. So let's boost the gain here. We'll drop this down, and I just want to hear my kick at this point. Yeah, and I might want to pull down some of these mid frequencies a little bit. Not too much, a couple dB. So now I've shaped that bass where we've got a solid thump on the bottom. I've got more snap on top for articulation where it's going to cut through the mix a little bit more. And I've also opened up some of that mid-range area where we can let the bass speak through. So now, even with just that little bit of difference, okay, now let's put an EQ on the bass. And instead, let's bring this up a little bit here, and let's use a shelf to bring down some of the very low end. I'm going to make that a little bit smoother here. Okay, so let's bypass our EQs. Here's our raw sounds. Now let's bring those EQs back in. So I haven't done a lot. You know, we've got a couple of dB here, about 4 dB of boost on the high end to bring out the snap on the kick. We've dropped just what do we got here? 2.3 dB down in our mid-range sort of area on the kick. We could even maybe pull that down a little bit more in frequency. And then over on the bass, we've just added a dB and a half, 1.3 dB. We've dropped by 2.5 dB on the bottom. So pretty subtle shaping really to sort of bring out that mid-range here where the attack is going to be, where we're going to have a little bit more of the drive, a little bit more of the articulation. And between the two of those then, we've created something that allows them to work alongside one another. Now I should say one other thing. Typically I don't work in solo with this type of thing, but I'm doing it here so that you can actually hear what I'm changing. Normally I do this in the context of the mix. Operating in solo lets you really focus in on what you're doing, but it doesn't always work then when you turn the rest of the tracks on. So let's go ahead and bring the rest of those tracks in. And, oops, sorry, I changed the order there. There we go. Okay, so we've got, let's hide this back out. We're not using that track. Okay. So, here's without our EQ. And here's with our EQ. Let's see if we made good choices. So you can hear that things are sitting a little better. We can more clearly hear the bass drum. At least I can hear in my mix in my room. Maybe it's not the sound you want. Maybe you want the opposite, where you've brought out the mid-range and the snap on the kick drum, and you brought out the bottom end on the bass to sort of give you much more of a solid bass, B-A-S-E, again, underneath there. That's your choice. It depends on the song you're working on, depends on the sound you want to hear. But in this case, what I was striving for was something where the bass would have a little bit more upper mid-range cut in the tone so that you hear it popping through, and then I wanted a solid hit from that kick drum. So that's why I went for these EQ curves in this particular case. So you can hear that let me even push the level up on the bass and the kick a little bit to make them even more solid in the mix. We might also want to consider putting a compressor on that bass guitar. So we could add a dynamics processor or something fairly simple would probably work. We can go with, let's just go with a optical style. And we could do the same thing on the kick, actually. We could put whatever compressor, whoops, dynamics, not EQ, there we go. And let's put that same thing here. So now, let's go ahead and solo these back again. Now I'm not compressing very heavily here. I'm just kind of touching those sounds to level them out just a little bit to make them sit a little bit more solidly in the mix. So let's go ahead and bypass here. And now with our EQ and dynamics. And in our mix. So you get the idea. What I'm trying to do is just level out the peaks just a little bit, trying to shape just a little bit so those two will fit together well and give us a solid bottom end on our mix. Now once again, maybe these aren't the sounds that you want. Maybe you want to hear something completely different in your mix. That's totally up to you, totally up to the style of song that you're working on, the genre, totally up to the effect you want to create and the results you want to get in the end. So experiment, try some of these techniques, make room in your mix, try to create complementary EQ, control the dynamics a bit, and you'll get great results when you're working with electric bass and kick drum in your mixes. I hope you've enjoyed this installment of Mix Tips. If you have questions or topics that you'd like to see us address in this series, post them in the comments below. I'm Mitch Gallagher from Sweetwater.